The flames licked higher, devouring the wooden walls of the Bandera church. Smoke rolled into the belfry where John Carter and Hannah Wallace crouched, rifles in hand, their eyes burning not only from ash but from the certainty that these might be their final moments. Outside, Caleb Thorne's riders circled like wolves, torches blazing, their shouts rising above the crackle of fire. "We free them, or we die trying," Hannah whispered, her voice raw but steady. John squeezed her hand, his silence saying what words could not. Below them, the sanctuary, once a refuge for the lost, had become a furnace. The wooden beams groaned, threatening to give way. Still, John held fast, determined that if this was to be their last stand, it would be one of defiance, not surrender. What had brought them here, to fire and fury, to courage and sacrifice, had begun only days before, under the shadow of a different night. Texas Hill Country, 1874. The war was long over, but its wounds ran deep across the land. Fields once rich with cotton lay untended, railroads cut across the prairies, and men who had survived Gettysburg or Shiloh carried scars too heavy to name. Bandera was a frontier town on the edge of that broken world, its church steeple pointing heavenward, its saloon doors swinging with equal force. John Carter lived apart from it all. Once a soldier, he had returned from the war mute, his voice stolen by horrors he could not put into words. He carried a slate and chalk instead, scrawling short phrases when needed. Most of the time, silence was his language. Solitude had become his refuge. But Bandera had no refuge for women like Hannah Wallace. She had been taken months before by Caleb Thorne, a man who wore wealth like armor and corruption like a crown. In his compound, hidden deep among the cedar brakes, Hannah and others bore scars of fire, brands seared into their flesh, marks of ownership no woman should ever carry. Lucas Reeves knew those marks well. Once Thorne's right hand, he had ordered the branding himself. Now he sought redemption in the only way left, by tearing down the empire he had built. His weapon was knowledge, his ally a silent soldier named John Carter, and his chance for absolution lay in freeing the captives he once condemned. It was Eleanor Martin who gave their cause shape. A widow of 60 winters, she had sheltered runaways during the war, her church a station on the Underground Railroad. Now, with Thorne's influence spreading into Bandera, Eleanor saw history repeating itself. "Evil returns in new clothes," she told John, her eyes fierce beneath weathered brows. "But the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever." So, on a moonless night, while most of Thorne's men rode south to answer a false alarm, John, Lucas, and Hannah moved like shadows. Their task was simple and impossible all at once. Break into the compound, unlock the bunkhouse, and lead the women out before dawn. John's rifle was steady in his hands as they approached the barred door. Lucas carried a ring of stolen keys, and Hannah, limping from an old wound, carried something heavier than any weapon, the memory of every woman inside. Behind those walls, children waited too young to understand their chains. Mothers clutched them close, whispering prayers into the dark. This was where the story truly began, at the locked door of Thorne's empire, where silence, guilt, and pain would join hands to strike for freedom. The night pressed heavy around Thorne's compound, the cedar and oak grove swallowing every trace of moonlight. Lucas Reeves moved first, his scarred face lit only by the lantern glow of a passing guard. He slipped into the shadows, keys in hand. John Carter followed silently, rifle slung across his shoulder, every muscle attuned to danger. Years of soldiering had carved a sharpness into him, an instinct that read the rhythm of boots on gravel, the creak of wooden gates, the pause before a cough. He raised a hand once, signaling a halt. A guard lingered too near. Lucas stepped forward with practiced ease. "Orders from Thorne," he barked. "All men to the south fence, raiders in the brush." The guard hesitated, then obeyed without question. Old habits of obedience still worked in Lucas's favor. He gave John a grim smile. "For now," he whispered. At the bunkhouse, the women stirred at the scrape of a key turning. Hannah Wallace slipped inside first, moving swiftly from pallet to pallet, her whisper low and urgent. "Gather your things, quietly, stay together." The women rose with a mixture of disbelief and hope. A few clutched infants against their chests. Others leaned on companions for support. 2 children, no older than 5, pressed against their mother's skirts, eyes wide. Hannah's hand lingered on one girl's hair, tender despite the haste. John watched from the door, jaw tightening. The sight of children here stoked a fire he kept buried, a rage sharpened by memory. He forced it down, knowing anger could blind a soldier when clarity was needed most. When the last lock clicked open, Lucas pointed east. "Follow her," he ordered. "Stay to the trees. Do not stop. Do not look back." Hannah nodded, steadying the line of frightened women. She gave John a fleeting glance, worry etched into her face. He answered with the only language he trusted, silence, firm and resolute. Then Lucas gripped John's arm. "Thorne's office," he said, "the evidence. Without it, this is just an escape. With it, we can burn him to the ground." John hesitated. It was madness to split their strength. Yet Lucas was right. Rescuing the women was mercy. Destroying Thorne was justice. He scribbled on his slate, "Too dangerous alone. I'll come." So Hannah led the women east toward the breach in the fence, while John and Lucas slipped into the main house. Inside, the air smelled of lamp oil and dust, the hallway silent but for the faint tick of a clock. Lucas moved with confidence born of familiarity, leading John to a door framed by polished oak. "Here," he muttered, unlocking it with another key. The office was immaculate, every paper squared, every surface gleaming. Behind a painting of Texas hill country hung a heavy iron safe. Its dial gleamed like a sentinel in the lamplight. Lucas exhaled. "This is where it turns." John ran his fingers over the cold steel, his eyes narrowing. Hannah had told him once about the brands, the strange marks seared into flesh. Perhaps those scars were not only for cruelty, but also for code. If so, the women carried the key to Thorne's downfall on their very skin. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The office smelled of lamp oil and leather, the kind of sharp orderliness that revealed its master's mind. Lucas shut the door softly behind them, then crossed to the far wall where a landscape painting hung. He lifted it aside, revealing a heavy iron safe. Its dial gleamed coldly in the lantern light. "Thorne never shared the combination," Lucas muttered, voice edged with frustration. "I tried for years, nothing." John stepped forward, eyes narrowing. He pulled his slate, chalk scratching in quick strokes. "The brands, each one is a piece." Lucas blinked. Then, slowly, realization dawned. The marks he had burned into the women? His jaw tightened. It would be just like him, turning suffering into a private code. The words struck Hannah harder than any blow. She stood rigid near the door, face pale, eyes fixed on the safe. Almost unconsciously, her hand drifted to her thigh where the brand scarred her flesh. "Circle with a T," she whispered, the memory rough in her throat. John's gaze met hers. For once, his silence wasn't emptiness, but a quiet recognition, an acknowledgement that he understood the weight she carried. He scribbled quickly, "Your pain is the key to his downfall." He held the slate toward her, eyes steady. For a moment, Hannah's breath caught. To think the very scar meant to mark her as property might now destroy the man who branded her. It was almost too much to bear. Yet in that inversion of cruelty lay a fierce kind of justice. She nodded, jaw tightening. Lucas began recalling other brands, describing them as he remembered. A star with an X, a triangle with a B, letters scorched into flesh. John sketched each symbol on his slate, pairing them with numbers, letters of the alphabet turned into a cipher. The safe's dial clicked softly as Lucas turned it. Right to 15, left to 24, right again. Sweat glistened at his temple. From outside, faint footsteps echoed in the hall. John froze, rifle snapping to his shoulder. The steps paused, then retreated. For now, they were still unseen. But time was slipping through their fingers. Lucas twisted the dial to its final number. Nothing. The handle refused to budge. He cursed under his breath. John wrote quickly, "Reverse the order." Lucas tried again, fingers moving faster this time, urgency tightening every motion. Right, left, right. A loud metallic click. The handle gave way. The safe door swung open with a groan. Inside lay rows of ledgers bound in leather, a stack of sealed documents, and a small iron box. Lucas seized them, sliding the papers into a canvas bag. His voice trembled with triumph. Names, dates, rail contracts, payoffs to judges. This isn't just Thorne, it's half the governor's men, bought and sold. Hannah's breath shuddered. What had begun as survival had just become revolution. Then from the hall came another sound. Boots striking floorboards, closer this time, with purpose. John erased the slate, wrote swiftly, "We're out of time." Lucas slung the bag over his shoulder, lantern extinguished with a sharp breath. The office plunged into darkness. Now their enemy would not only hunt them for what they freed, but for what they carried. The night was nearly spent by the time Hannah led the line of women into Bandera. The town lay still, the cedar smoke of hearth fires curling faintly from chimneys, its streets empty save for the clop of weary feet. At the edge of the square stood the church, whitewashed boards weathered by sun and rain, its steeple pointing into the dawn like a raised hand in prayer. Eleanor Martin waited at the door, lantern in hand. Her gray hair was bound neatly beneath a shawl, her posture straight as a fence post. When she saw the women, her eyes softened, though sorrow traced every line of her face. "Come in, quickly," she urged, holding the door wide. Inside, the pews had been pushed aside, quilts and straw pallets laid on the wooden floor. The freed women sagged down in exhaustion, children clinging to them, their small faces pale from hunger and fear. Eleanor moved among them with a tenderness that came from years of carrying burdens not her own. "This church has stood through war and fire before," she said quietly to Hannah, who lingered near the entrance. "During the dark days, we hid men and women fleeing north. Soldiers searched these walls more than once, but the Lord kept them blind. It seems He has brought us the same work again." Hannah's throat tightened. For the first time since the raid began, she felt the weight of what they carried. This was not merely escape. It was continuation, another link in a chain of deliverance that stretched back through blood and faith. From a side room came Dr. William Hayes, spectacles askew, sleeves rolled high. His hands bore the stains of medicine and gunpowder alike. He moved swiftly to the nearest pallet, kneeling beside a woman whose ankle was badly swollen. "A sprain, not a break," he muttered, his fingers probing gently. "We'll bind it with cloth soaked in comfrey." Another child coughed raggedly. Hayes leaned over, examining the boy's chest. "Smoke inhalation. He needs willow bark tea for the fever." Hannah knelt to help, recognizing the plants from her own training. "You've studied more than Western medicine," she remarked. Hayes gave a tired smile. "Frontier doctors must. The Comanche taught me which roots soothe the lungs, which leaves cleanse the blood. I doubted their wisdom once. War stripped me of many certainties, but not of knowledge." Together they moved from pallet to pallet, easing fevers, binding wounds, coaxing strength from weakness. Hannah's hands were steady, but each time she saw a scar seared into a woman's skin, her own throbbed in memory. Yet here, under the lantern glow and Eleanor's prayers, pain seemed to find new purpose. Eleanor paused, looking over the room filled with weary survivors. Her voice was low but clear. "The scripture tells us that testing of your faith produces perseverance, James 1:3. We were tested once before in this place, and now again. But see, perseverance has carried you here tonight." A hush fell. For the women, those words were not sermon but balm, a reminder that their suffering had not gone unseen. Hannah touched her scar lightly, not with shame but with resolve. If her mark was to endure, then let it testify, not to thorns' cruelty, but to the God who turns scars into strength. By dawn, the women lay sleeping in exhausted silence, the church transformed into both refuge and infirmary. Yet peace was as fragile as glass. Outside, a riderless horse staggered into Bandera, its flanks lathered, reins dragging. The sight turned heads at the livery, and whispers carried quickly. Something violent had happened along the southern trail. Eleanor read the fear in the townspeople's eyes. "It won't be long before word reaches Thorn," she told John and Hannah as they stood near the doorway, watching the gray horizon brighten. "He will come for them. He will come for us." John's jaw tightened, the rifle across his shoulder more weight than weapon. He wrote on his slate, "How much time?" "Hours, no more," Eleanor answered. "Perhaps less." Hannah's hand trembled as she brushed soot from her dress. For the first time since leaving the compound, she allowed herself to picture Thorn's face again. Cold, calculating, a man who never forgot what he believed was his. Fear pressed at her ribs like iron bands. Yet, when she looked at John, standing solid and silent, her breath steadied. They moved back inside, where Dr. Hayes tended the wounded with meticulous care. The air smelled of herbs steeped in boiling water. Women murmured in their sleep, shifting on pallets, their children curled beside them. For this one moment, they were safe. Eleanor beckoned John and Hannah to sit with her at a side pew, the lantern light soft on her weathered face. "You should understand what this church is," she said. "During the war, I hid slaves bound for freedom. There were nights when hounds bayed at the doors, soldiers pounded on the walls, and still we did not yield. Freedom always carries a price." She paused, her eyes on Hannah. "You carry that price on your very skin." Hannah's fingers brushed unconsciously at her thigh where the scar lay hidden. The words should have shamed her, but Eleanor's voice carried no judgment, only recognition. John shifted, chalk scratching on his slate. "You risked everything before. Why do it again?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "Because evil never rests. It returns in new guises. We cannot choose the times we live in, but we can choose whether to bow to them. And you, both of you, were brought here for such a time as this." Hannah turned toward John. The lamplight caught his profile, the unshaven jaw, the scar at his temple, the silence that clung to him like armor. She remembered how his hand had steadied hers at the safe, how his eyes had spoken when his lips could not. "You understand, don't you?" she said softly. "The scars that never leave, the battles that never end." John looked at her, and for once his slate lay idle. Instead, he simply inclined his head, slow, deliberate, a soldier's acknowledgement. The moment stretched, unspoken yet binding. Then the sound of hoofbeats shattered it, distant, many, approaching fast. Eleanor rose, eyes sharp. "So soon," she whispered. "Then God grant us strength." The storm they had feared was already upon them. The hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the mesquite groves beyond town, but the threat lingered like thunder on the horizon. Everyone inside the church felt it. Sleep had fled. Even the children clung silently to their mothers, sensing danger they could not name. Lucas Reeves stood apart, his back to the altar, shadows carving deeper lines into his scarred face. He had been restless since they returned, pacing the length of the pews, jaw tight. At last he stopped, his voice breaking the hush. "You should know what I was," he said, "before tonight, before all this." Eleanor turned, her expression calm but steady. "We know you served Thorn," she replied. "We know you turned against him." Lucas shook his head. "That's not enough. I ordered the branding. I held the iron. Some of the marks on these women—" His words faltered, as though the memory scorched anew. They are mine." The air thickened. Hannah stiffened where she knelt beside a pallet, her hand frozen mid-motion as she adjusted a child's blanket. The women who were awake stared at Lucas, eyes wide with fear and anger. John rose slowly, rifle loose in his hands, not raised, but ready. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked on Lucas. Lucas raised both palms in surrender. "I don't ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I will not hide what I've done. If I die tonight, I die known." The silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot. Then Eleanor stepped forward, her small frame cloaked in quiet authority. She studied Lucas for a long moment before speaking. "You sinned grievously," she said. "You caused pain that cannot be undone. And yet," she placed a weathered hand against his arm, "if a man turns from wickedness and seeks redemption, the Lord does not turn him away. Neither shall I." Her words broke something in him. Lucas bowed his head, shoulders shaking. For the first time in years, he let the weight fall, not into despair, but into the strange relief of confession. From one corner of the church came a sound, low, trembling, but clear. One of the women began to hum, her voice carrying an old tune born on slave ships and whispered through cotton fields. Another joined, then another, until the rafters filled with a harmony of grief and hope intertwined. The melody was no longer sorrow alone. It was defiance. It was prayer. It was the sound of souls refusing to be broken. Words wove into hymn, unquoted yet familiar, an echo of faith passed down through generations, that God sees, God remembers, God delivers. Hannah's eyes brimmed. She pressed her hand over her scar, not to hide it, but to hold it steady against the rising song. John, standing in silence, felt the music stir through him like a wind against a long-locked door. For a moment, the fear of Thorn's coming army fell away. The church, with its battered pews and weary souls, became what it had always been meant to be, a sanctuary. And in that fragile harmony, John saw that redemption was not a myth for others, it was a possibility for them all. The first shots cracked through the stillness before noon. Sharp, echoing reports rolled across the limestone hills, carried on the spring wind. Men on the church roof stiffened, rifles gripped tighter. A riderless horse came stumbling back from the northern trail, its saddle bloodied. "Scouts," one of the townsmen muttered grimly, "Thorn's already here." Word spread quickly through Bandera. Storekeepers shuttered windows. Mothers pulled children inside. A few men took up rifles, but many kept their eyes down, hands trembling as they bolted doors. Fear had settled over the town like a heavy dust storm. Inside the church, Eleanor gathered the small group. "We cannot stay here," she said. "Thorn will come in force." One of the townsmen, Thomas, spat against the floorboards. "Then let's hand the women back. They're not ours to protect. He wants them, not us." Gasps rippled through the room. Hannah rose, eyes blazing. "You would send them back to chains, to fire and iron?" Thomas shifted uneasily under her glare. "I've got a wife and children. Don't ask me to risk them for strangers." John stood at the window, silent, watching smoke curl from the northern tree line. His hand itched against the rifle's stock. He knew Thomas wasn't alone. Half the town thought the same. Bandera had been too long under Thorn's shadow. Courage had withered under its weight. Lucas spoke, voice low but steady. "These women aren't strangers. They are the proof of what Thorn is. If we give them up, then his power stands. And we," he looked around the room, meeting each gaze, "remain his slaves, even without the brands." Eleanor lifted her Bible, its cover worn from decades of use. "A house divided cannot stand," she said firmly. "We must choose, fear or faith." Hannah turned toward John then, searching his face. He had been their shield, their silent strength. But now she could see the war inside him. His slate rested unused at his side. She whispered, Tell me, John, will you run or will you stand?" The words struck like iron. Memories rose unbidden, battlefields thick with smoke, his brother's final cry, the silence that had swallowed him whole since. Running had kept him alive, but not whole. Standing might destroy him, but it might also give meaning to the scars he carried. The hoofbeats grew louder outside. Shouts echoed across the square. John finally moved, lifting the rifle in one deliberate motion. He did not write on his slate. He did not need to. His choice was carved in the steady way he checked the chamber, in the calm with which he positioned himself at the door. Hannah's breath caught. For the first time, she saw not just a broken soldier, but a man choosing, willingly, to fight again. Eleanor's eyes shone with quiet pride. "So be it," she whispered. "Then Bandera shall be tested as we once were, and may the Lord find us faithful." Outside, the first of Thorne's riders galloped into view, rifles glinting in the sun. The battle had come to their very doorstep. The church shook with the rattle of gunfire outside. Thorne's riders had reached the outskirts of Bandera, testing the defenses with quick strikes. Every window rattled, every child whimpered in silence. Inside, men crouched low with rifles aimed through broken panes, their breaths sharp with fear. John knelt at the front, eyes fixed on the square. His hands were steady, but his chest tightened with the old familiar weight. He had seen towns burn before. He had heard the screams of men left behind. And always, the last sound in his memory was Isaiah's voice calling his name as the battlefield swallowed them both. A hand touched his shoulder. He turned to find Dr. Hayes, pale from his wound but steady, lowering himself beside him. "You don't speak much," Hayes said softly, keeping his eyes on the street. "But I know your silence. I carried it once too." John frowned, uncertain. Hayes gave a tired smile. "Before medicine, I was a chaplain. The war cured me of it. Too many prayers unanswered, too many graves dug. But one night in Galveston—" His voice caught, and he pressed a hand to his bandaged shoulder as if steadying himself. "I sat with a soldier, Isaiah Carter, your brother." The world narrowed to that name. John froze, the rifle slackening in his grip. Hayes's voice dropped. "He was wounded badly, knew he wouldn't see the morning. He asked me to pray with him, not for his life, but for you. Said you were the strongest man he'd ever known, but you'd lose yourself if silence swallowed you. He begged me to tell you one day, find your voice again, find your way home." John's vision blurred, not from smoke, but from the flood of memory. Isaiah's laughter, Isaiah's hand gripping his shoulder before the charge, Isaiah's body crumpled in the mud. For years he had carried that last sight like a stone in his chest. Now, hearing that his brother's final breath had not been despair but hope, it broke something loose. Hayes looked at him, weary but unwavering. "I lost my faith in God, John." "But not in men, not in what one man's courage can mean for another. Your brother believed you weren't finished, and I think he was right." A crack of gunfire split the moment. A window shattered overhead. John ducked instinctively, dragging Hayes down with him. Dust filled the air, the acrid scent of powder mingling with sweat. But inside John, the silence that had ruled him for years trembled. His brother's words, carried across death and time, stirred like embers under ash. He could not speak them yet, not aloud, but he felt them burning against his tongue, waiting. Hannah appeared at his side, revolver in hand, her face streaked with soot. "We need you," she whispered fiercely, "all of us." John met her gaze, then Hayes's, then Eleanor's, where she stood at the altar whispering prayer over the frightened. The storm outside raged, but within him something shifted. For the first time in years, John Carter no longer felt like a man running from war. He felt like a man called to stand. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The sound of hoofbeats rolled like thunder through the valley. Closer now, no longer a distant warning. From the church steeple, smoke from the northern trail could be seen curling upward, evidence of Thorne's men cutting their way through the countryside. Inside the church, fear pressed heavy against the walls. The women clutched their children tighter, and even the men who had armed themselves shifted nervously. The storm had arrived. Lucas Reeves moved to the doorway, rifle in hand, his scarred face set in grim resolve. He glanced back once, his gaze passing over Eleanor, over Hannah, and finally to John. Something unspoken flickered there. Acknowledgement, farewell. "They'll be here within minutes," Eleanor said, her voice steady though her eyes glistened. Lucas nodded. "That's long enough." Hannah rose quickly. "No, you can't go out there. We stand together." Lucas shook his head. "If I stay inside, the whole town will be ash before dawn. They'll surround us, burn us out. But if I hold them here—" He looked at John again, then at the women huddled along the pews. "You'll have a chance." John lifted his slate with sharp, deliberate chalk strokes. "Too dangerous." "We fight side by side." Lucas gave a rough smile. "Not this time, mountain man. This sin was mine to begin with. Let me pay something back." Eleanor stepped forward, tears brimming but voice unwavering. "Lucas." He stopped her with a small shake of his head. "No sermon, Eleanor, just prayer." For a moment, silence hung. Then Eleanor whispered, her voice like a benediction. "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." The verse settled over the church like a mantle. Lucas bowed his head once, as if accepting it. Then he turned, stepped into the fading light, and pulled the heavy doors closed behind him. Through the cracks in the shutters, they watched. Thorne's riders swept into the square, torches flaring, guns gleaming. At their head rode Caleb Thorne himself, dark coat whipping in the wind, his face carved in fury. Lucas strode into the open, rifle raised. He fired once, dropping the lead rider from his horse. Chaos broke. Bullets cracked through the air, torches tumbled, horses reared. Lucas moved with grim precision, each shot buying precious seconds. But numbers told. A bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him back. He staggered, found his footing, fired again. Another tore through his side. Still he stood, blood soaking his shirt, defiance in every motion. From inside, Hannah clutched the windowsill, tears streaking her smoke-marked face. "He's buying us time," she whispered, voice breaking. John pressed his hand against the wood, fingers white, every instinct screaming to run out, to fight beside the man. But Lucas's choice was made. At last, surrounded, out of bullets, Lucas dropped to one knee. He lifted his eyes toward the church, toward Eleanor. Even from a distance, his lips formed words none could hear, but all understood. Then Caleb Thorne leveled his revolver. A final shot echoed. Lucas Reeves fell. The square went silent. Inside the church, the people knew there was no turning back now. The church doors trembled as fists and rifle butts slammed against them. From outside came Thorne's voice, low but carrying across the square with practiced authority. "Eleanor Martin, I know you're in there. You've got what's mine. Hand over the women, and I may yet show mercy." The words slithered through the wooden walls like smoke. Mothers clutched their children tighter, some whispering prayers under their breath. A torch was hurled against the stone steps, its flames sputtering, a warning of what could follow. Eleanor stood tall at the altar, her Bible clutched in both hands. She did not move toward the door. Instead, she called back, her voice steady as the bell that once rang from the steeple. "These women belong to no man, Caleb Thorne, not to you, not to anyone." A ripple of murmurs rose inside the church, fear mixed with awe. Thorne laughed, the sound harsh. "You think your God will protect you, old woman. This is Texas, not heaven. I hold the law here. One word from me, and Bandera burns." John shifted beside the doorway, rifle in hand, his silence heavier than any curse. Hannah moved to his side, revolver steady, her jaw clenched. Together they formed a wall between the enemy outside and the trembling souls within. "John," Hannah whispered, barely audible, "we can't let them break them, not here." His eyes met hers. No words, no slate, just a quiet agreement written in the steel of his gaze. Another crash thundered against the doors. Thorne barked fresh orders, his men spreading around the church. Through the shutters, shapes flickered, torches in every hand, circling, hemming them in. Thomas, one of the townsmen, swallowed hard. "We can't hold them. Maybe we should bargain." Hannah whirled on him, fury blazing. "Bargain? After Lucas bled for us? After what these women suffered? No, we stand." Her defiance lit a fire in the room. Even those who trembled found themselves straightening, clutching rifles a little tighter. Eleanor lifted her voice again, quoting words that rang like iron. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" The scripture hung in the smoke-filled air, steadying hearts. Outside, Thorne's patience snapped. His voice grew cold, deadly. "You've made your choice then. So be it. Burn it down." Torches arced through the night sky, striking the church's walls. Flames licked hungrily at the timber, the crackle of fire joining the rising clamor of horses and men. Inside, the refugees drew close together. John took position at the front pew, rifle resting steady. Hannah moved to the opposite side, revolver cocked, eyes unflinching. No more waiting. No more running. The siege had begun, and in that instant John Carter knew this was the hour his silence would either define him or be broken forever. Flames climbed the eastern wall first, creeping like serpents along the dry timber. Within minutes, the crackle turned to a roar, and smoke rolled thick through the rafters. Heat pressed down upon the congregation until breathing itself felt like drowning. "Up," John motioned, waving the others toward the hidden exit Eleanor had prepared at the back. One by one, the women were led out by the townsmen, their frightened faces streaked with soot as they vanished into the night. But not all could leave. By the time John and Hannah reached the stairwell, fire had already consumed the lower doors. The only path was upward. They ascended the narrow steps two at a time, coughing through smoke, until they emerged in the belfry. The bell overhead, blackened with soot, swayed faintly in the rising heat. Through the arched windows, they could see Bandera's square ablaze with torches, Thorne's men circling like jackals. "We're trapped," Hannah said, voice hoarse. John pressed a wet strip of cloth to her mouth, then another to his own. His silence said what words could not. Yes, but not without a fight. Shots cracked from below. A bullet splintered the wooden railing inches from Hannah's arm. She steadied her revolver and returned fire, forcing two riders to scatter. John's rifle thundered next, dropping a torchbearer before he could reach the wall. For every man they stopped, two more appeared. And always the flames rose higher, gnawing closer, until sparks fell like fiery rain upon the belfry floor. Hannah's hands trembled as she reloaded, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing. She glanced at John, his face lit by the glow of firelight, scarred, silent, unyielding. "If this is the end," she whispered, "then let it be together." John's eyes met hers. For a heartbeat, the smoke and chaos fell away, and there was only her courage, her wounds, her unbreakable spirit. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took her hand. The gesture said what his voice had long withheld. "You are not alone. Not anymore." The church groaned as beams buckled. The bell swayed violently, each clang a funeral knell. Heat rose until the very air seemed aflame. Hannah leaned closer, pressing her forehead to his. "At least we freed them," she said softly, a tear tracing a path through the soot on her cheek. John squeezed her hand, steady as stone. He wanted to speak, to let her hear the words locked inside him for so long. But the fire roared, drowning thought in its fury. Below, Thorne's men shouted in triumph, certain the blaze would finish what bullets had not. Yet in the belfry, amidst the smoke and ruin, two souls found their strength, not in escape, but in defiance. Together they braced against the coming collapse. The belfry trembled, each groan of the beams a warning of collapse. Smoke thickened until the world narrowed to coughing breaths and the sear of flame. John wrapped an arm around Hannah, steadying her against the swaying rail. Then, through the roar of fire, came a new sound, hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, pounding from the west. Hannah lifted her head, eyes widening. Through the haze, she glimpsed riders cresting the ridge, not 6 or 7, but dozens. At their head rode a man in a wide-brimmed hat, badge gleaming in the firelight. "Marshals," she whispered, disbelieving. Down in the square, Thorne's men faltered. The sudden arrival of disciplined riders, rifles leveled, commands barked, threw them into chaos. Some dropped their torches and fled, others fired wildly, only to be cut down in the crossfire. Marshal Davis himself swung down from his horse, his weathered voice carrying across the square. "In the name of the United States, lay down your arms!" Most obeyed, but not Thorne. The warlord stood defiantly on the church steps, revolver gleaming in his hand, his face a mask of rage. "This is my town," he bellowed, "my land. No marshal, no court in Washington can take it from me." He fired at Davis. The bullet struck sparks from the stone. Marshals returned fire, but Thorne moved with desperate fury, forcing his way toward the church. Above, John saw him through the haze. Their eyes locked, silent mountain man against the tyrant who had branded women, broken lives, ruled through fear. This was the end. John raised his rifle, steady despite the smoke burning his eyes. Beside him, Hannah rested a hand on his arm, anchoring him in the storm. He fired. The shot struck true. Thorne staggered, clutching his chest, yet still he came forward, hate driving him beyond reason. He lifted his revolver again, aiming for the belfry window, but Davis was faster. One clean shot rang out. Thorne's body jerked, his revolver clattering to the stone. He fell backward onto the burning steps, eyes frozen in disbelief. His reign ended in fire and ash. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames and the shouts of marshals dousing the church with buckets from the well. "Here!" Hannah called hoarsely, waving from the belfry. "We're up here!" Below, men brought a wagon forward, sacks of feed piled in its bed. "Jump!" one shouted. "The floor won't hold!" John glanced at Hannah, his hand tightening around hers. Together, they climbed onto the ledge. Smoke billowed, heat blistered their skin. "On 3, Hannah whispered. 1, 2. They leapt. The world spun, then struck, the impact driving the breath from their lungs. But the sacks broke their fall. Pain lanced John's ankle, yet when he looked beside him, Hannah was alive, her soot-streaked face lit by the miracle of survival. Strong arms pulled them from the wagon as the steeple collapsed behind them, sparks spiraling into the dawn sky like 1,000 prayers released. Thorne was gone. The town was saved. And for the first time in years, John Carter felt the weight of silence begin to lift. Dawn stretched its pale light across Bandera, revealing the scars of the night. The church stood a blackened skeleton, its steeple collapsed into smoldering ruin. Smoke drifted upward like incense for the dead. The townspeople gathered in silence. Mothers soothed frightened children. Men removed their hats, heads bowed. Among them, Eleanor stood rigid, her eyes fixed on the body laid out on a simple wooden board. Lucas Reeves. His scarred face, now still, bore a strange peace that life had rarely given him. The blood that stained his shirt had dried, but the sacrifice it told of burned fresh in every heart. Eleanor touched his brow gently, her lips moving in prayer. Her voice cracked, yet she did not falter. "He was my son in all but blood, and now he has found his rest." Hannah stood near, tears streaking her soot-stained face. She reached for John's hand unconsciously, gripping it tightly as Eleanor continued. "Last night he proved what Scripture says is true, that greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. He died that others might live free. Let us not forget that." The crowd murmured their assent, sorrow mingled with reverence. John's chest tightened. He had seen comrades fall before, men who fought and bled beside him in the war. Yet something about Lucas's final stand struck deeper, perhaps because it had not been for glory or for orders, but for redemption. As Eleanor's prayer ended, all eyes turned toward John. He had become the silent sentinel of their struggle, the man who had carried the fight without words. They expected nothing more from him now than the same silence. But something stirred within him, the memory of Hayes's whispered words, Isaiah's dying prayer, Hannah's courage at his side. The silence that had bound him for so long cracked beneath the weight of it. He drew a breath, smoke-scorched and raw. His voice rasped, broken but real. Lucas was brave. The sound startled even him. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd as he continued, halting but steady. "He stood when others ran. He gave us this chance. And we will honor him by living free, by standing together." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, but her smile was radiant. Hannah's grip on his hand tightened, pride shining through her grief. The silence that had once defined John Carter no longer held him captive. In its place, a voice, fragile but rising, joined the chorus of the living. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in hues of gold, the people of Bandera began to rebuild not only their town, but their hope. Lucas Reeves was gone, yet his sacrifice had lit a flame that no fire could extinguish. By evening, Bandera was quiet again. The marshals had ridden out with prisoners in tow, leaving behind only ash, weary faces, and the fragile stirrings of peace. The women rested in the remaining pews of the ruined church, their children curled at their sides. Some hummed soft lullabies, ancient songs of survival that rose faintly above the crackle of dying embers. Eleanor moved among them, offering water, blankets, whispered prayers. Her shoulders were stooped from grief, yet her presence carried a steady strength that kept despair at bay. Outside, under the fading light, John sat on the steps with Hannah beside him. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine smoke and rain on the horizon. For the first time in what felt like years, he let his rifle rest at his side, hands empty. Hannah leaned against him, exhaustion written in every line of her face. Yet her eyes, when she lifted them to his, held something new, something unbroken. "We survived," she said softly, almost in wonder. John nodded, the wordless habit still clinging to him. But tonight he forced past it. His voice, hoarse and uneven, broke the silence. "Together." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it, their fingers locking with the ease of those who had shared both fire and faith. Across the square, the frame of the church still smoldered, a skeleton against the twilight sky. Hannah stared at it for a long moment. So much lost. Eleanor's voice carried from the doorway behind them, answering the thought as though she'd heard it. Buildings can be rebuilt. What matters is the lives spared, the freedom gained. Even ashes can give rise to something new. She stepped closer, her face lined with weariness but radiant with faith. Revelation tells us he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The scripture settled over them like a benediction, wrapping the night in quiet hope. Hannah exhaled slowly, leaning her head against John's shoulder. He let it rest there, his hand tightening over hers. In her touch, he felt not only comfort, but the promise of a future he had thought forever lost. For years he had been a man defined by silence, by the ghosts of war and the weight of grief. Tonight, in the ashes of Bandera, he found something else: a voice, a purpose, and a hand to guide him home. The fire had taken much, but it had not taken hope. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion and fragile renewal. Bandera, though scarred, did not collapse under the weight of its suffering. Instead, its people rose with a stubborn resolve as old as the frontier itself. Marshal Davis had left a detachment of men to keep order, but the heart of the town's healing came not from badges or rifles, but from Eleanor. Every day she gathered townsfolk among the charred ruins of the church, her voice rising above the hammering of nails and the ring of hammers. She spoke of hope, of memory, of the God who does not abandon his people even when walls fall. John and Hannah worked alongside her, though not always in the open square. Their strength was needed elsewhere, protecting the women who still lingered in Bandera before moving north, helping repair wagons, hauling lumber from the hills. John's silence no longer made him a ghost among the workers. Word had spread of his voice breaking forth at Lucas's funeral. Men nodded in quiet respect when he passed. Women touched Hannah's arm with gratitude. Dr. Hayes, his arm bound in a sling, moved about with determined energy. He treated burns and bullet wounds, stitched cuts from falling debris, and mixed herbal remedies with a confidence learned in both war and wilderness. Hannah assisted him often, their partnership a dance of practiced skill. The freedwomen came to her especially, trusting her gentle hands, her unwavering gaze. One evening, after a long day of tending wounds, Hannah stood by the creek outside town, washing the soot from her arms. John approached quietly, as he always had. But when she turned, he did not avert his eyes as before. "You're healing them," he said. The words came rough, halting, but they came. Hannah's lips parted in surprise, then softened into a smile. "So are you." He looked away for a moment, toward the horizon where the sun sank behind the hills. "I thought my life ended with the war, with Isaiah." His throat worked, and his next words were barely more than a whisper. But maybe it was only waiting. Her hand touched his arm, light but sure, waiting for this. For a time they stood in silence, listening to the water's song. Two souls, scarred by different fires, finding in each other the shape of a home. The decision came a week later. Eleanor had gathered them in the half-built church, its new frame rising pale against the sky. "It is not safe for you to remain here," she said. "Thorn may be gone, but his allies linger, and the women we saved, each must be carried further north, to safety." Hannah straightened. "I'll go with them." Eleanor shook her head. "No, you've done your part, more than your part. Others will carry them now." She turned her eyes to John. "You have a cabin in the hills, do you not?" John hesitated, then nodded. "Go there," Eleanor urged. "You, Hannah, and Dr. Hayes until his wound is fully mended. I will remain here. The church must rise again, and I will see to it." John frowned, but Eleanor's resolve was immovable. She had already buried a son. She would not bury her calling too. And so, at dawn, a small wagon rolled out of Bandera, John riding ahead, Hannah seated in the back with Hayes, Eleanor watching from the steps of her ruined church, her hand raised in blessing. As the town faded behind them, John felt the weight of silence ease again. The road stretched forward into the hills, toward the cabin that had once been only a hermit's refuge. Now, perhaps, it could become something more. Hannah's eyes met his as the wheels creaked along the trail. Her smile was tired but steady. "We're not just surviving anymore, John," she said softly. "We're living." And for the first time since the war, he believed it. The trail to the hills wound long and slow, but for John it felt like returning not to solitude, but to promise. His cabin came into view by late afternoon, unchanged from the day he had left it. Rough-hewn logs, herbs strung from the rafters, a fire pit gone cold. Yet something in the sight tightened his throat. It was no longer only his. He helped Hayes inside, settling the doctor onto the cot. Hannah moved quickly, gathering water and tending to the fire until the small space glowed with warmth. Watching her move through the room, quiet, purposeful, steady, John felt the weight of years spent alone recede like a tide. Days fell into rhythm. Hayes, though weakened, improved steadily. The infection receded under Hannah's careful tending and John's steady supply of herbs. At first the doctor spoke little, wearied by pain. But one evening, as John returned from checking snares, he found Hayes awake, Bible open across his knees. "I left this behind after the war," Hayes said softly, without looking up. "Too many graves, too many prayers unanswered. But in Bandera, seeing Eleanor, seeing you both stand when the fire rose, I remembered something. That faith isn't about being spared suffering. It's about enduring it with purpose." John said nothing, but the words settled deep, a mirror of the truth stirring within him. Hannah's hand brushed his as she passed him a cup of water. In her eyes he read agreement. They had both been spared for a reason. As weeks passed, the cabin changed, not in its walls or roof, but in spirit. Eleanor's absence left a silence, but her faith seemed to linger with them, woven into the prayers Hannah whispered at night, into the doctor's slow return to his ministry of healing. For John, change came hardest and most unexpectedly. He spoke again, not constantly, not fluently, but when it mattered. Simple words. Here. Careful. Together. Hannah never pressed him for more, only smiled each time, as if each syllable were a victory. One evening they sat by the creek, the same spot where Hannah had once wept over her brand. Now the scar remained, but the shame had lessened. She touched it briefly, then let her hand fall. "It will never fade," she said quietly. John reached for his slate, then hesitated. Instead, he spoke, voice low but clear. "Neither will your strength." Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her, the gesture both tentative and certain. For years he had carried silence like armor. With her, he could lay it down. By spring, Hayes was strong enough to return to Bandera, eager to help Eleanor rebuild the church into a place of both worship and refuge. He left with blessings and promises to visit. John and Hannah remained. Together, they planted a garden behind the cabin, rows of corn and beans beside wild herbs. Together they hunted, split firewood, and tended the snares. Their laughter, hesitant at first, began to echo through the clearing, a sound the forest had not heard in years. One evening, beneath a sky ablaze with stars, John took a silver coin he had carried since the war. With his knife, he shaped it into a simple band, rough but enduring. He placed it in Hannah's palm without a word. Her fingers closed over it, her lips trembling into a smile. "Yes," she whispered. No vows spoken before crowds, no church walls to sanctify it, only the witness of the heavens and the God who had carried them through fire. Yet it was enough. As summer dawned, the cabin no longer felt like exile. It was home. Not because it was safe from the world's cruelty, but because it held within its walls two broken souls who had chosen each other. The war had taken much, thorn that taken more. But in the ashes of loss, they had found what neither expected: faith restored, love born, and hope stronger than scars. And as John sat with Hannah at the threshold of their cabin, her hand in his, the horizon glowing with the light of another Texas sunrise, he knew at last that Isaiah's prayer had been answered. He had found his way home. Though the tale of John, Hannah, and Eleanor has reached its end, its echoes remain, reminding us of the sacrifices, the quiet courage, and the faith that carried so many through the frontier years. For some of you watching, these struggles may stir memories of family stories once told by firelight. Tales of hardship, of hope, of love found in the harshest places. These are not just adventures from a distant past. They are lessons in resilience, in standing for what is right, and in believing that even from ashes, life can be rebuilt. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us for more true Wild West stories, narratives that honor the grit, the grace, and the God-given spirit of those who came before. Subscribe, share, and walk with us again across the untamed frontier.